Mayor Eric Adams throwing his full support behind a proposed mask ban on the subway and at protests.
People are using masks to commit crimes, to commit assaults. Cowards cover their faces.
But as you can imagine, the idea of banning masks in New York is highly controversial. There are people who, for personal reasons, want to cover their faces. And if you've ever ridden a packed subway train in the wintertime and heard everyone coughing and sneezing, you might have considered wearing one yourself. I don't care how for or against masks you are. New York's got a lot of interesting people out there, and if one of them has their face right here and they sneeze on you, you'll wish you were wearing one.
All right, let's start off talking about weekend at Biden's. So the Biden family met at Camp David. This was, it was Jill Biden, his wife, his son Hunter Biden, their grandchildren. They all convened at Camp David. It was a previously scheduled get-together.
Yeah, so weekend at Biden's, that was our show title last week. And then they literally did a weekend at Biden's to have a talk with him. I'm going to show you his response because he did make some comments this week without teleprompters. We have a CBS clip coming up for you. But let's go back to the first video in that block. Cash Jordan, New York, all that nonsense about masks. Or was it sense about masks? What do you think about that? Well, let's rewind a couple years. Back in 2019, only, maybe people from other continents who were worried about germs, they would wear masks in New York. You might see certain ethnic parts of town, more people would wear masks because I think that's like a style overseas for some people. 2020, masks became mandatory in New York, such that after John Taylor Gatto died during the pandemic, we had to go into New York City. Two of our helpers, good friends of mine, would not wear a mask, and they were not allowed in the building, and they would have called the police if they tried to enter the building without a mask. So there was a mandate. They made a law that told people what they had to do. Now, let me ask you a question. Is wearing a mask taking away your freedom? Well, do you have freedom to identify the person from afar? You don't. That's part of life. Can you make somebody wear a mask? I don't know. That's pretty hard to do too. So I think on this, freedom should rule out. It shouldn't have been mandated in the first place. Then you wouldn't have to make a law against it now. The reason you got so much crime in New York is because New York's full of criminals. Let's start at the top and how New York is run like a gangster cartel and let that precipitate down to the poor people who try to coexist there. Also, those people aren't allowed Second Amendment rights. So you're going to have those types of problems. If everybody was armed in New York City, you'd see a lot less muggings, carjackings, shoplifting. It would all go down pretty much immediately. But you'd be ceding control of monopoly of force from New York PD to the actual citizens who are responsible for their own safety, not some third-party delegation of a city government's budget. That's nonsense too. So there's a lot of nonsense. So if we just quit the nonsense, then I think you would have sense return. When you'd start seeing people being able to fight back in an equal way. I mean, you guys lost the war. The bad guys are robbing cops, and the bad guys have machine guns. They can outgun the cops. Like, I thought that was the thing that had gone out of style in the 90s after, what was the movie about the LA shootout? Heat, with Pacino and De Niro. That's when the criminals outgunned the police, and you saw a strong militarization of police, especially after 9/11. To the point where they had equal armaments to many of the soldiers overseas, sometimes better quality equipment because of how taxation without representation still works in this country. So there was a lot of that. And then to see those overly armed forces of security pulled back to make people of New York City so vulnerable, and then to bring in a bunch of migrants who, by the way, a lot of their cultures, because of religious reasons, they do cover their faces. Are you going to try to make them? You're not doing anything to them. You don't even hold people in prison. Like, you don't even hold them in jail for a day. Like, the DA just lets everyone go. So it's nonsense trying to make a rule, because the only people who are going to follow that new law are law-abiding people. And they weren't the problem of anything in that situation in the first place, except for acquiescing their freedom of Second Amendment in the first place to a bunch of nonsense made by people who are guarded by people with Second Amendment rights 24/7. So if you're governor, if you're mayor, if you're, local person in government, if they have police protection of the nth degree, maybe you should have it for yourself. I'm just saying, This country is strongest when the citizens are armed equally to the government, and that went away about 100 years ago. So you want to get strong again, we're not going to have to keep depending on people who aren't showing up to save you in those situations. We might need to get some more responsibility of self and learn how to think our way through these situations. Speaking of which, before we go to this next juicy block, I got this for you guys. Coming up later this month, the Autonomy Mindset 3 conference. Now, did you need to see 1 and 2 to get value out of this? No, you don't. But you have a chance to see 1 and 2 because registration is free and the other packages that we've done before are also available. So it's about intellectual self-defense, to discern truth, to navigate those tough conversations in life, and protect yourself from the hidden agendas and the control of your mind through assumption that things that they're saying are true when they're not. So intellectual self-defense, it's just kind of what we did over here on this this Twitter post, right? This looks a little specious. That's a large number. If it's the Lancet, why aren't we hearing about it through Time Magazine, for instance? When you actually go through and practice intellectual self-defense, you're going to learn a lot more than just that headline you looked up. That's a point. So anytime that you're incredulous and you don't assume, it opens the door to learning. That's what Mindset 3 is all about. Improving your critical thinking skills, breaking free from those illusions. Like, we just saw the whole Biden audience waking up to that. If you're a critical thinker and you're evaluating what you've been seeing in front of you, you wouldn't have been gaslit for so long, if at all. Intellectual self-defense lecture and the critical thinking workshop, that's going to be part 2. That's the after event where we all work out together. And there's a whole bunch of things you get when you join. And the URL, it's because it's probably too small on screen for you to read, universityofreason.com/autonomy-mindset-3. And it's free access to the lecture. So now you guys have seen the offer. You know what's going on in a couple weeks. It's coming up. Let me go back to the top of the stage. Well, it tells you right there. Doors close in 13 days. But you don't have to wait till the last minute because you get goodies if you enter early.
Everyone's doing some kind of self-help these days, and you can find a million self-help courses out there. Most other courses out there are hosting lectures. They're hosting videos. They're maybe even doing Q&As. And these are great starting points to encourage learning. But at Autonomy, we believe that hands-on practice is the best way to really lock in what we're learning. There's no better way to gain confidence and mastery than through action. After each lecture, we practice the concepts we've learned with other students, giving and receiving feedback in a non-judgmental environment. The result is mastery of concepts like entrepreneurship, ethical sales, and self-reliance in an environment that directly translates to the real world. Plus, you make connections with other like-minded individuals who are learning right alongside you, and you have a lifetime membership in the community. The Autonomy course with Richard Grove equips you with confidence, competence, and courage in a world filled with confusion and noise. You can learn more at getautonomy.info. We'll see you there.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. there's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come